Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Before we begin, if you have a scary story you'd like to share, feel free to submit it in the comments below or send it to me on my email. Now, let's get into tonight's stories. This all happened around a year ago, right after the holiday season. I live in a small suburban neighborhood that borders a forest in southern Quebec. It's quiet. Most residents know each other, which honestly adds a warmer atmosphere to the area. During winter, I take my dog Monty on walks through the local forest. He's a Rottweiler Husky mix, perfect for someone like me who enjoys going for runs. The forest has several trails, none too challenging for casual hikers. I remember it being an afternoon in late February. I'd just finished a late lunch and decided to burn some calories with Monty. As usual, he went ballistic when we turned the corner toward the forest entrance. It was relatively cold that day. Fresh snow had blanketed the paths overnight, creating this nearly blank canvas. I let Monty off the leash so he could run around. There were a few yellow patches in the snow, along with some boot prints, signaling that several people had already taken their dogs out earlier. Most people prefer morning walks since the sun sets around 4 p.m. in winter, so I didn't expect to see anybody out at that time. After walking for around 30 minutes, we came to a fork in the path. I noticed one trail hadn't been walked yet, so, feeling semi-adventurous, I decided to take it. I have a pretty solid memory of these trails, so I knew exactly where I was going. The trail led to a clearing, which was perfect since I wanted to check out the native birds with the binoculars I'd gotten for Christmas. I remember scanning the surroundings until I saw a strange shape along the tree line in the distance. When I focused my binoculars, I saw a blue tarp and what looked like a makeshift shelter. As curious as I was to check it out, it was getting dark and I wanted to get home. Turning around, Monty and I started walking back. As usual, he ran ahead, but something seemed off in his behavior. He was much more alert, sniffing the trail more intensely than he normally would. When I looked down at the trail, my eyes widened. There was a set of footprints in the snow, much larger than my own. I remember turning my boots over out of sheer confusion to compare them. The prints were completely different. There were no other forks in the trail, so whoever made those prints had to have passed me at some point. I figured they must have walked by while I was using my binoculars. At the time, it seemed like the most logical explanation, so I tried not to overthink it. At this point, it was significantly darker outside, but I could still make out my surroundings. As we were walking back, Monte stopped abruptly and started barking relentlessly in my direction. As I turned around, that's when I saw him. There was a man, probably around 6'4", wearing charcoal-colored snow pants and a white camo jacket. He was only about a meter away from me. He didn't make any movements toward me, he just stood there with his hands in his coat pockets. I didn't recognize him from anybody in the neighborhood, so I assumed he must have been a hiker or someone from out of town. He looked like he was muttering something to me, but I couldn't read his lips due to the lack of lighting and not knowing if he was speaking English or French, the two commonly spoken languages in Quebec. I felt like an idiot for not bringing my phone with me. I ended up trying to communicate that I was hard of hearing and that it was getting late. I got back home around 4:30. By then, it was completely dark out. I remember following my standard night routine, not really thinking much about the encounter. But in the middle of the night, something happened that still shakes me to this day. I woke up to Monty licking my hand, something he usually does to get me out of bed in the morning. I tapped my phone to check the time. To my surprise, it was 3 a.m. I noticed a message from my neighbor asking if everything was all right. The message was a few minutes old and asked about Monty, who had apparently been barking like he was possessed. I looked up from my phone to see that Monty was no longer in my room. I walked downstairs to find him barking hysterically at the patio door. As I approached the door, I struggled to see anything with my vision still blurry. I tried to focus my eyes when the motion sensor light turned on. At that moment, my heart sank. The man from the forest was standing there in my backyard. I didn't think twice. I stepped away from the door and texted 911. I don't think I've ever texted faster than I did that night. I ran upstairs with Monty and grabbed the machete from under my bed. I'm a shorter woman with a background in martial arts, but I know damn well that the best move in a fight is to not fight at all. I sat there in my room guarding Monty and myself until the police came. With my heart beating out of my chest, I sat opposite the door with Monty by my side. It didn't last long until Monty sprang up and started barking violently at the bedroom door. My hands were sweating profusely as I watched a shadow cast from underneath the door. The movement suggested the man was seconds from breaking into my room. Those had to be the longest minutes of my life as I anticipated the door handle turning or the door completely breaking in. Luckily for me, it never did. When the police arrived, I explained everything while they searched the property. The glass on the patio was completely smashed, but besides that, nothing was missing. The police found the gate in my backyard open. It leads to the forest, which is where they believe the man disappeared. I told them about the shelter I'd seen in the woods. I took Monty and some belongings to stay with a family friend for a few days while I got the patio door fixed. I never got a follow-up from the police after the incident. Ever since that day, I decided to stick to roads when walking my dog, not trying to think too much about what could have happened. My name is Ember, and I'm a 16-year-old girl from Illinois. What happened to me and my sister Kate taught me one terrifying lesson. Never trust a text message when a phone call goes unanswered. I live with my younger sister Kate, who's 15. My dad works for a deforestation group about 30 minutes from our house. It was a normal morning on December 5th. Kate and I were getting ready to go to the movies. We decided to watch Terrifier 3, which had some Christmas stuff in it. We knew it was 18 plus, but nobody paid much attention. We looked older anyway. We made our way to the theater and easily got in thanks to our appearance. However, halfway through the film, as everyone was anticipating the next scene, my phone buzzed loudly enough for the whole theater to hear. Everyone turned toward me with annoyed looks. Kate and I scurried out, and I tripped, which was embarrassing enough. After we exited the theater, I checked my phone to see who'd called. It was my dad. But instead of calling back, I received a text message. "Hey, would you mind bringing me some lunch since the small cafe in the woods is shut today?" I looked over at Kate. She looked confused, but neither of us second-guessed the message since it seemed normal. We arrived home, packed some food for him, and took my car downtown to the woods. I've always loved that place. Never felt uneasy there because it's large and secluded. The scenery is amazing, with a hill that leads down to a lake perfect for fishing and photos. After a while, Kate and I got out of the car and walked down the path through the woods. I took out my phone to call my dad, but he didn't pick up. Confused, I looked over at Kate, who was just as confused as I was. Why wouldn't he respond when he just called us? I decided to message him instead, reminding him we were at the woods with his lunch. After a few moments, I saw the 3 dots appear, showing he was typing. He responded, telling us to walk down the small hill and wait for him at the lake. The sun was slowly setting since it was winter. The sky had a beautiful radiant orange glow over the hill and down the mountain. Snapping out of my thoughts, Kate pointed down to the lake where a man in black was sitting on the deck by the water with his back to us. We guessed it was our dad. We walked down a bit more and stopped a little behind him. I called out his name, but he didn't move. Kate grew uneasy, and her attitude made the scene even eerier. I slowly pulled off the hood he was wearing and revealed a man who definitely wasn't our dad. Kate and I shrieked as he turned around and began waving my dad's phone like a maniac, smiling like he was happy to see us scared. I blurted out asking why he was using our dad's phone, but he didn't respond. Instead, he lunged and grabbed Kate's arm as she screamed. Luckily, I was strong enough to pull her away, and we started running as fast as we could. The adrenaline pushed through us so much that I'd never seen either of us run that fast. Behind me, I heard stomps getting closer, so I knew we were being chased. I didn't dare turn around. Finally, we reached the car. I slammed the door shut and locked it as the man came to my window, then crouched down out of sight as I reversed and sped away back home. When we got home, my dad and mom were there. We arrived panting, out of breath, and explained the whole situation. My dad was furious and said his phone had been stolen while he was working, so he'd come back home. He called the police and filed a report. They used the IMEI number to track the device, which was still on the deck by the lake. They returned the phone to my dad, but said there wasn't much they could do since the phone was already found. I thought this was the end of it, but I wouldn't be telling this if it was. 6 hours later, around 1 a.m., I got an unknown message that said, "I like that your house is lit only by your bedroom TV." I immediately went cold and pale. I paused the TV and heard rustling outside my window. My room was on the 2nd floor. I shut my phone and listened. Slowly, I peeked through the blinds and saw the man smiling with a gun pointed at my window. I screamed and pulled away as glass shattered everywhere across my room. My parents ran in, followed by Kate. I screamed for them to crouch and told them the man was outside with a gun. When my dad went to check, the man was gone. Then we heard another loud bang and more glass breaking downstairs in the kitchen. We ran and locked the bedroom as Kate called 911. My mom hugged us as we cried in fear. A few moments later, the police arrived and searched the whole house, but nobody was there. Kate and I explained the situation again, and one of the officers said they should check the car. Surprisingly, a small AirTag was found on my tire, which explained how the man knew where we lived and why he crouched before I sped out of the woods. The police told us they'd patrol the streets and do everything they could to find the man. A few months later, he still hasn't been found, but he never returned, which I hope stays that way. Me, Kate, and my parents are still traumatized by the situation. But mostly, I felt stupid as the older sister for not being alarmed when the person didn't respond to calls and only responded through texts. All I know is that I'll be more careful and never go to secluded places again, especially when I'm responsible for someone else's safety. It was 2021, prime COVID time. One word to describe my night: nightmare. Because what I found in the driver's seat of my car after it crashed still makes me question what's lurking in those woods. Work was a disaster. I was working from home and was supposed to be meeting with my extended family upstate. I ended up finally getting off a nearly 3-hour Zoom meeting a whole hour and a half after everyone had already arrived at my parents' house. That didn't include the next 2 hours the trek up to their house would take me. I filled up 2 cups of coffee in my kitchen to take with me. God knew I'd need them. The second I opened my front door, I realized this drive would be more of a disaster than I'd thought. The snow and wind had already picked up since earlier that evening, and the streets were barely plowed. The ground had at least 2 feet of snow already, and it was supposed to snow like this for most of the night. I had to drive under 25 on most residential roads. My car at the time was a really old, crappy Hyundai, not ideal for extreme weather conditions. It didn't have anti-lock brakes either. I'm a fast driver though, so when I got on the highway, I raised my speed to 70, probably a lot faster than safe for the conditions. I finally arrived at my parents' house around 9 p.m. They'd begun dinner without me, but thankfully weren't too far along. A few drinks and gift exchanges later, I started to lose track of time. I got so caught up seeing relatives I hadn't spoken to in a while that I basically forgot I still had to drive home, even as most of my family started to leave. Once I finally got in my car, it was past midnight, and at least another foot of snow had accumulated on the ground. I was buzzed, but figured I was sober enough to drive home. Not that I condone drinking and driving at all. I was tired and simply wanted to get home. As I headed toward the highway, I realized the roads were completely dead. I made the grave mistake of raising my speed to 40 down one particular road. As I began to approach a bend, I realized my car had gone into a skid. I tried not to panic. This wasn't the first time I'd skidded. I started to steer into the skid and downshifted. But as I got even closer to the curve and my car still wasn't slowing down, I started to panic. My car went straight off the side of the road and into a tree. The airbag deployed. I was momentarily in shock from the force of the impact, but thankfully I was relatively unscathed. My car was ruined, though. The whole hood was buried in a bank of snow surrounding the tree I'd hit. No chance I was pushing it back onto the road. The first thing I did was phone my roadside assistance company. They said they'd send a truck to my location, but because of the horrible conditions, it could take up to 40 minutes. I was on a deserted road surrounded by forest, with no houses for miles in either direction. So I decided to also call my parents and ask one of them to drive over and wait with me. My dad said he'd get in his car and come. As I was sitting there, I began to hear something over the sound of the wind howling outside. There were undeniably footsteps in the snow. I couldn't tell exactly from where, but they sounded somewhat distant. I opened the driver's side door and stepped out of my car, checking my immediate surroundings. I made a disturbing discovery. There were boot prints in the snow circling all around my car and then leading away from my passenger side door into the woods. I felt sick to my stomach. I also noticed there were drops of blood in the snow. I opened my driver's side door and grabbed my 9mm out of the glove compartment. Clutching it in my right hand, I began to follow the prints leading into the woods. At that moment, I was convinced someone was out there with me. As I followed the prints, the drops of blood began to grow larger. It looked like someone had been bleeding profusely. And then I saw some dark mass lying in the snow just past the tree line. I couldn't tell what it was. I was just praying it wasn't a person. I took out my phone and enabled the flashlight. It wasn't a person. It was a dead deer, seemingly slaughtered by some larger predatory animal. The stomach was ripped completely open, and shockingly, the deer had been completely decapitated. I swept the flashlight over the surrounding few feet, but I didn't see the head anywhere. I decided this was getting too weird for me, and I started heading back to my car. I got back to my car and opened the driver's side door. As soon as I did, it was all I could do to keep myself from vomiting on the spot. Lying in the driver's side seat of my car was the severed head of the deer, placed on the seat as if it was looking right at me. I booked it out of there and made it a few minutes down the road before headlights appeared in the distance. I ran toward the car, waving my hands and shouting like a madman, still holding my handgun. Thankfully, it was my dad. He stopped the car and asked me what the hell I was doing. I got in the passenger seat and explained everything to him. And I kid you not, he literally didn't believe me. I felt more comfortable going back to my car with my dad, though, so he drove the two of us over there and we got out. The footprints were still all around my car, but the deer head was gone. All that remained was a large spot of blood on my driver's side seat. I think once my dad saw that, he started to believe me. The deer corpse was also gone. All that remained were drag marks in the snow. The tow truck finally showed up and towed my car. My dad asked if I wanted to call the police, but honestly, I just didn't have the energy to file a report. I was exhausted and just wanted to go to sleep. I figured calling the police wouldn't accomplish anything anyway. So that's my story. I have no idea who was in the woods that night and what they wanted. Maybe they were just trying to scare me. Or maybe they had worse intentions.